Let's talk about choosing the right drums for the song when you're recording, because so often we find ourselves talking about sample replacing, talking about changing things in the end process, talk about EQing something to fix something, talk about all this like fixing stuff, all these band-aids, but we're never talking about how do we get the right sound in the very beginning. Now, I want to show you something that I experimented with over the weekend. It wasn't an experimentation in the traditional sense of experimentation. It was an experimentation in the sense that working with a new band, we're working on this song, we've never done anything before, and I say, I think that this sounds good, but I also think it can sound better. So I'm going to play the chorus from this song called Over It that I recorded this weekend with a band called Fwango, Fwango. And this is something that I think is a really valuable lesson to learn. Now, keep in mind, I have nothing on these tracks, no plugins on these tracks. The only thing that I'm doing is just compressing it with an SSL compressor a little bit just so you can really hear all the end state of the drums, because that's what I like to do, is get mostly in the right place. But I don't need to do a lot to get that to that point. Now, I'm going to solo these up just for the sake of it, just to start off. But keep in mind, when you're selecting drums for a song, you're not supposed to be thinking about how they sound by themselves. You're supposed to be thinking about how they sound all together with everything in the mix. So it's kind of hard whenever you first start and you're just tracking piece by piece. If you just track drums by themselves, it's going to be really hard to tell if this is going to be right or not. But if you track as a band, which I did with this band, then you have a much better piece of information. But here's the drums all by themselves. Now, overall, a pretty decent sound for a basic drum sound, but I immediately recognized that the snare for me for this song had too much tone, too much body to it. There was so much going on, and the hats were a little bit too clean and too reverberant. Like they were really like echoing in the room a lot more than other hats might. So I had him swap out the snare drum first, and that's what we'll hear in take 3. Right here. So this is just the snare drum swapped out, but the hats are the same still. Now again, I want to point out it's arbitrary to make this distinction without having a reference, without having something that tells you whether this snare sounds good or not. It's all by itself. So let's put it back into the song, and let's listen to the song with the original drums.
Live slowly, nothing
Now, to me, that snare drum commands too much attention in the wrong way. It's a good sounding snare drum, and overall it's not like it's awful, but the way that it sits in the track is it's influencing the bass, it's influencing the guitar. It's like just doing a bunch of stuff that I'm not liking as much whenever I hear it. So let's go to the next snare drum choice, which I thought was a better choice, but I still thought needed some work to be perfect. So here's the second snare drum in the track.
crying before taking power. You told me.
Now again, it's sitting a lot better to me. The lack of tone of that snare drum is really making it sit in the track really nice, but I still felt like that we could do better than what we had. So then we swapped out and we went to the next snare drum, and now this is my acrolite. We used a bunch of different options, but this ended up being the acrolite, I think, that we used here. Now hear this in the track and how well it sits.
Live slowly, nothing ever lasts forever. I heard you crying before taking power. You told me.
Now, I didn't change anything else about the kit in the meantime. It was just the swapping of the snare drum that made this difference, and this difference was all the difference in the world for the way that this song came together. Now, once I had a snare that I was happy with, the next step was to replace the hat. Now, I'm going to show you what the original hat sounded like in the verses because that's where it was really being played and bothering the shit out of me. So here it is.
What was my name? How things have changed. We used to go dancing in our younger days. Now you're over it. You're over it, baby.
Now, this is what it sounds like with the new hi-hat and the new snare in the verse. Specifically listen for how much space it has around the vocal now.
What was my name? How things have changed. We used to go dancing in our younger days. Now you're over it. You're over it, baby.
Now let's compare them in the moment. Here, I'll start with the old hats, old snare.
What was my name? How things have changed. We used to go dancing in our younger days. Now you're over it. You're over it, baby. I could have stayed, I'd never complain. I'd wash the floors and do the dishes all day. But you're over me. You're over me.
Now, in general, it's like a much tighter sound, and it seems to fit the song much better. And those are the only changes. It's crazy how much the whole kit seems to tighten up whenever those two elements have been changed. So the next time you're in these situations, the next time you're recording a band, take the time to try some different options. And the only way you'll get really good at understanding how these things affect the song as a whole is to try them out a bunch and then start thinking about what if this hat was a little darker or a little bit drier or a little bit washy or a little bit whatever, and start making those decisions early in the process, and you won't have to try and make all of your sounds fit at the end of the process when you're mixing. And check out my TikTok and my Instagram, Greasy Will Music on TikTok and Greasy Will on Instagram. And also I have a Patreon where you can watch back episodes of the Monday Mixing Monday. I don't know what the fuck I call it anymore, but I call it something, and you should be there and watching it.
Live slow.